Welcome to this episode on why becoming better feels so uncomfortable. Now, someone recently asked me why he feels like his spirit is weak. He said he's trying to improve, he sees progress, he understands what limits him, but no matter what he does, he keeps getting pulled back by old habits, old urges, and old instincts. And he said something important. He said, I feel like I know what I should be, but I can't leave who I am behind. That sentence right there, that's not weakness. That's the exact moment growth starts to hurt because what he's describing isn't a lack of willpower. It isn't a lack of discipline and it isn't a moral failure. It's what happens when improvement threatens identity. And that's what nobody explains. So let me say something that sounds obvious, but most people get completely wrong. Most people don't fail at self improvement because they're weak. They fail because they try to grow without understanding what growth actually costs. Becoming better doesn't feel uncomfortable because it's hard. It feels uncomfortable because it messes with who you think you are. People assume discomfort comes from effort, from waking up earlier, from working harder, cutting habits, being disciplined. That's not what hurts. What hurts is the moment you realize the version of you that made sense of your life doesn't survive the upgrade. And your brain hates that. Nobody tells you this part. They say, change your habits, but they never say you're about to feel like you don't recognize yourself. That's the real cost of growth because your identity isn't just a label, it's a structure. It's how you explain your past, how you justify your behavior, how you stay emotionally coherent. And when you start becoming better, that structure cracks, not slowly, but violently. You don't just feel tired, you feel off. You don't just feel unmotivated, you feel detached. You don't just feel tempted, you feel pulled back by something familiar, almost comforting. That's not weakness. That's the old version of you trying to stay alive. Here's the part people never realize. Your nervous system doesn't care if you're successful. It cares if you're familiar because familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar growth. Your body would rather keep you in a life you hate than risk you stepping into a life it doesn't recognize yet. So when you start changing, your system reacts like something's wrong. You feel anxiety with no clear cause. You feel bored by things that used to stimulate you. You feel drawn back to old habits you thought you outgrew. You feel like quitting for no logical reason. And you start telling yourself stories. Maybe I'm not built for this. Maybe this isn't who I really am. Maybe I'm forcing it, or maybe I should just relax. That voice sounds reasonable. It's not. That voice is identity resistance. You're not fighting laziness. You're fighting continuity. Your mind wants the story of you to stay consistent because if you change too much, then everything before this moment has to be reinterpreted. And that's terrifying. Think about it. If you really become disciplined, what does that say about the years that you weren't? If you really become confident, what does that say about the version of you that played small, if you really become focused, what does that say about all the time you wasted? Growth forces a reckoning with your past, and most people don't fail because they can't improve. They fail because improvement rewrites the narrative of who they've been. So instead of moving forward, they unconsciously protect the old story. They relapse, they procrastinate, they self sabotage. Not because they're weak, but because the old identity is familiar. They that comment about having a weak spirit, that's not a weak spirit, that's a destabilized identity. When you remove the habits, routines, and distractions that define the old version of you, there's a gap. You're not who you were, but you're not yet grounded in who you're becoming. That gap is brutal. It feels like anxiety without fear, boredom without rest, temptation without desire, or restlessness without direction. People think something is wrong in that phase, but nothing is wrong. You're in between cells, and society is terrible at explaining this. We tell people to improve, but we don't tell them to temporarily feel less like themselves, not more. So they tend to quit. They go back to the old routines, the old habits, the old identity, not because it was good, but because it felt known. Here's the sharp truth. Your subconscious prefers a version of you that survives over a version of you that thrives. Survival is predictable. Thriving is undefined, and undefined feels dangerous. This is why improvement doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels disorienting. You lose the emotional rewards of the old life before you gain the rewards of the new one. That's the trap. You're doing the right thing, but it feels wrong. You're progressing, but it feels like regression. You're evolving, but it feels like instability. And the mind says abort mission. Most people listen. The ones who don't, they pass through something rare. They stay inside the discomfort without interpreting it as failure. They let the old self collapse without rushing to rebuild it prematurely. They accept that growth has a void phase, and once that void passes, something clicks. The new identity stabilizes, the anxiety quiets, the urges lose their grip, the habits feel natural instead of forced, the discipline feels like alignment instead of effort. That's when people say, now it feels like me. But it only feels like you because you endured a phase where you didn't. This is the part nobody posts about. The middle, the awkward, unstable, uncomfortable middle where improvement feels like self erasure. But here's the philosophical core most people miss. You don't become better by adding things to who you are. You become better by subtracting who you're not. And subtraction feels like loss before it feels like clarity. So if becoming better feels uncomfortable right now, don't panic. Don't overthink it. Don't moralize it. Ask a better question. Which version of me is resisting being left behind because that discomfort isn't a sign you're failing. It's evidence that something real is changing. Most people don't fail because they can't improve. They fail because improvement feels like self erasure before it feels like growth. If you understand that, you stop running from the discomfort and start recognizing it. And once you recognize it, it loses its power. That's when growth stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like truth. That's the difference between people who change their life and people who stay stuck forever.